Think about this. There are a few reasons our culture is so polarized right now. One of them is that our children are learning opposing values from the families where they're raised. I would even posit that education is our most woke media right now, which is worrisome since only our children are seeing the messages being delivered by our educators.
In the meantime, I tell this kid, we do have a flag in the class that you can pledge your allegiance to. And he looks around and he goes, oh, that one?
I've spoken to several parents in my own community, some liberal, some conservative, and although there's a considerable array of values and viewpoints, most agree that transgender ideologies and critical race theory shouldn't be taught in school. As a result, I wanted to understand just how widespread these topics were being taught in our school. We're going to dive into the answer as well as name 4 reasons that wokeness is so prevalent in our schools. If you think these conversations are as fun as I do, hit those like and subscribe buttons. My name is Chris, and this is The Think Report.
Hello, Navarro. Suck any good lately. What's wrong, Navarro? I think you like a big in your mouth. Ha ha ha. Page 23. The other boy, page 23. Here it is. What's the educational benefit of talking about What's the educational benefit of talking about that? Is that going to help someone on the SAT score?
Let's start by looking at some of the big differences between the US, Canada, and the UK. First, gender identity doesn't appear to be taught as much in the US as it does in Canada and the UK. For now, these lessons still appear to be more of the exception than the rule. The opposite is true regarding critical race theory. In Canada and the UK, it's taught, but not as it is in the US. Canada's version is about indigenous populations and how we stole their land. The UK has a law which is supposed to prevent political impartiality. The purpose of the law is to prevent teachers from imposing their views on a child which may contradict the values of the family. However, educators seem to detour this principle when it comes to gender ideologies. Make no mistake, these things are being taught in all of these countries. Some critics point to the curriculum as evidence that it's not being taught. It's true that these things are absent from most curriculum. However, in a study from cityjournal.com of 1,500 18 to 20-year-old Americans, a demographic that has yet to graduate from or only recently graduated from high school, it is clear that it is woven into the curriculum. If you look at the top row, 36% of students were taught that the US is a systemically racist country, 41% that white people have white privilege, and 35% of people have an unconscious bias that negatively affects non-white people. The same thing is true in Canada. Lee Ayrton, an assistant professor of gender and sexuality studies in education at Queen's University, describes that teachers in Canadian schools have a tremendous amount of latitude to exercise their professional judgment about how to help learners meet those expectations. So as we read about transgender controversies in the news, we should know that most of the recent controversy is about individual school policies and teachers, not the actual curriculum. In fact, the Toronto School Board has a specific policy that prevents teachers from informing parents about a child's desire to transition. According to TDSB's own policy, a school should never disclose a student's gender nonconformity or transgender status to the student's parents, guardians, or caregivers without the student's explicit prior consent. This is true regardless of the age of the student. At a minimum, this is an abuse of the trust and authority parents grant teachers. Parents have a legal duty to be informed about their underage children. Talking to teachers, this has become a common policy throughout Canada. Boards of education, education ministries, and even the Public Health Agency of Canada are urging schools to both automatically honor and transition a student's request to change their name and pronouns. and to keep that information from parents if requested. This is just one way the education system has become intimately involved in the transgender process, which affects an exponentially growing number of children. Schools accept name and pronoun preferences, provide gender-neutral washrooms, and teach from a very young age about gender identity. In some cases, they even refer students directly to gender treatment clinics. So why is this happening in our education systems? Let's dive into 4 reasons that our schools are so woke and completely disregard the parental wishes of the children they educate. In a study published by Econ Journal Watch, researchers looked at 40 of the top 60 universities. They investigated the voter registration of faculty at 40 leading U.S. universities in the fields of economics, history, journalism, law, and psychology. They evaluated 7,243 professors and found that 3,600 of them to be registered Democratic and 314 Republican, for an overall Democratic to Republican ratio of 11.5 to 1. The ratio broke down as follows: economics, 4.5 to 1. History, 33.5 to 1. Journalism, 20 to 1. Law, 8.6 to 1. And psychology, 17.4 to 1. The study also breaks it down by university, which I'll link to in the description. In addition, the study illustrated that Democratic voters skewed young and female. This amplifies the problem in our public schools, since most teachers are female. Generally speaking, this isn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. Jobs that require the caring of other people should attract people who want to care for other people. However, compassion is never a substitute for rational decision-making. Schools exist to set up our children for economic and moral success in our communities. A school system that loses sight of that goal is a system that fails. Okay, so think about this. If a teacher was to give the same amount of education to every child, the best students would do much better than the weaker students, right? No surprise. That basically represents your bell curve, with the high achievers at one end and the low achievers at the other, and the rest of us somewhere in the middle. But what if you could give more education to lower performers? The class average would come up, and there would be a smaller gap between the high and the low performers. In this example, we're talking about equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. In most cases in education, employment, and politics, equality of opportunity should be our default setting. It is the most fair and unbiased way to make decisions and allocate resources. But in this specific case, equality of outcome makes some sense. By bringing more education to those who need more attention, not only does the class average improve, but we would then have a more educated society and consequently a smaller socioeconomic gap between high and low achievers. If you've ever listened to Sam Harris's podcast, this would be in line with his breed of liberalism. They understand that equality is on an individual level. You could teach the same thing to intelligent and unintelligent kids, but you're going to see an increase within the spread of opportunity. As a result, schools must consider equality of outcome more than the rest of us need to. With equality of outcome pairs a way of thinking that often goes hand in hand with other far-left ideologies. If you listen to Jordan Peterson, he's all about meritocracy in universities. In post-secondary education, that's probably right. But for grade 12 and under, the education objective is different. The objective of a university is to provide education for research opportunities for our smartest and brightest to explore, innovate, and push our civilization forward. The purpose of a public school system is to equip students with the skills to make good economic and moral decisions within their communities. These are vastly different objectives. Winston Churchill said, "If you're not a liberal when you're 20, then you've got no heart. And if you aren't a conservative when you're 40, then you've got no brain." Numerous studies have proven this quote untrue. Most political viewpoints remain steady throughout a person's life. However, if they are to change their political viewpoint, they're more likely to change it from liberal to conservative than the other way around. It is also true that newer generations skew more socialist, even if that viewpoint doesn't change as they age. In addition, they also want more government intervention, which is pretty disappointing, to be honest, because what they don't understand is that it will cost them more in taxes, which means they can't buy a house or a car or the latest iPhone for the best TikToking. So back to the question at hand, why are schools so woke? Young students tend to skew left. So not only are teachers left, but students are too. Have you ever walked through your child's school and thought that you were walking through a rainbow?
What is this, a freak out?
Hey, this isn't funny, Wonka! You can't possibly see where you're going, Wonka!
You're right. I can't.
School themes are set by the board and executed by the principal. Normally, colors and energy and excitement are all part of the learning process. But lately, there's a new theme that brings in equity and inclusion into the forefront of education and places it higher than the traditional institutional goals like maths, English, and science comprehension. This is largely due to the role of the principal through two major problems. In most organizations, a senior manager will have between 4 and 7 reports. The number will range based on the scope of control the leader wants over the department, which is influenced by the culture in the organization and the stage of the business life cycle. Younger and smaller companies tend to have managers with more direct reports than older, larger companies. If a leader wants more control over the operations, they'll have more direct reports, and the opposite is true for few reports. This essentially describes a horizontal versus a vertical reporting structure. However, the more reports you have, the less time you can dedicate to them. So there's a practical tipping point where a manager's control shrinks due to time constraints. However, in any given school, there can be anywhere from 100 to 200 teachers. Teachers report directly into the principal or the head teacher, which means that the principal can have up to 200 direct reports. So how do you manage 200 direct reports? The answer is you don't. This is a job position that is doomed to fail. I've never met a principal who didn't work 12 hours a day and on weekends. As a result, teachers have a tremendous amount of freedom to teach their class however they like. And we all know that teachers aren't created equal. Many are good, but some will absolutely impose their values on your children, against your wishes. The second problem is that the goals of a principal are focused on equity and equality, not learning and comprehension. In most communities, principals are governed by their school board, their professional governing body, and in some ways, the limitations put on them by the teachers' unions. Let's look at Ontario as an example. In Ontario, which used to rank number 3 in the world for education and now sits at number 15, sets the first goal as a principal as learning programs that demonstrate a commitment to equity, anti-racism, decolonization, inclusion, and diversity through learning opportunities that foster anti-oppressive and ethical leadership. Why isn't number 1 on the list learning comprehension so that students can maximize agency over their own decisions in the world? So they know how to make good financial decisions. So they know how to properly weigh political and economic choices. So that they can read about history that will help them make better moral decisions. The second goal is relevant and meaningful learning opportunities that are grounded in theory and practice, designed to support learners in the development of the relevant knowledge, skills, and attitudes required for leadership roles in Ontario. This is better, but why leadership positions? The vast majority of people won't be leaders. Wouldn't simple financial decision-making be a fundamental skill to have for all people? Reading through the rest of the goals, 5 regarded equity, 2 leadership, and 1 for gathering feedback for improving the curriculum. Of the 8 goals, that a principle is striving towards, which is a lot on its own, the majority of them pertain to equity. That says to me that equity is more important than maths, more important than English, history, and philosophy, more important than science and how the world works, more important than how our economy works. That's nuts. When comparing principals in the US and head teachers in the UK, their job goals seem more appropriately designed. For example, in California, arguably the most woke US state, sets the primary goal of the principal as adopt and support rigorous academic content and performance standards in the 4 core subjects for kindergarten in grades 1 through 12. UK job descriptions state something similar. So all in all, within the role of the principal or head teacher, Canada seems far off from what our communities should be expecting of them. I've quoted this story before in the Think Report. The Tie is one of many publications that claim that 2 LGBTIA+ children and youth are being targeted by hate-motivated extremism under the guise of parental rights. There is nothing parents care about more than their children. When educators withhold information about a child's desire to transition, when they preach CRT and trans rights and indoctrinate them into the trans community and tell parents that they are the extremists, it's criminal. It's not far removed from child abuse. Children are raised by their families, not their teachers. Anyone who insists on interfering with that needs to be aware that they're picking a fight with the one thing a parent cares about most in this world. Think about that.